help if I turn the microphone on. I will now ask the Government Officer to read out the domestic arrangements and the fire regulations. Claire.
Thank you, Chair. Please ensure that microphones are turned off when not in use, and please ensure your mobile phones are on silent or switched off and that your laptop is also switched to silent. I'd like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. The whole of the meeting will be recorded except where there are confidential or exempt items. The Council, members of the public and the press may film, record, photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and the press are not lawfully excluded. If you are intending to do so, please can you let us know? The fire safety arrangements: if you hear the fire alarm, leave the building immediately by the fire exit, which is over there, and make your way to the assembly point, which is Ipswich Town Training Grounds. Use the stairs, do not use the lifts, and do not re-enter the building until told it is safe to do so. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Claire. Introductions. Today we have with us is Stephen Stroud, the Acting Chief Planning Officer. Our legal advisor today is Ian Dupre, and our case officer is Vincent Pearce. You've already met Claire, our committee clerk, and ward member present is Sally Davis. Can I move to the agenda? Apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies from Councillor Simon Dowling.
Thank you. Declarations of disclosable pecuniary interest and other registrable and non-registrable interest by members. Are there any to declare? Nope.
I think Vincent wants to say something.
Sorry, Chair, can I just declare an interest for the sake of transparency? The agent, Mr. Board, and I did work together many, many years ago at Colchester Borough Council. I don't think we've socialised or our paths have crossed professionally since then, but for the sake of transparency, there is that long ago history. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Declarations of lobbying. Are there any to declare? No. Declarations of personal site visits. Are there any to declare? No. All right. We'll move on. Confirmation of the minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of February 2025. Are there any points regarding the accuracy of the minutes? Councillor Mabry?
Thank you, Chair. Page 9, the very last line, I'm sure that's supposed to be as may be required, not as might be required. Sounds as though somebody's trying to be very dictatorial on something, but it should be may, I think.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. I'll amend that, and we can vote on that with the amendment.
Okay. Thank you. Proposed. Councillor Beers making a proposal. Councillor Register is seconding. We will now conduct the electronic vote.
Thank you. Chair, that vote's in progress, members. Councillor Granton? Abstain. Abstain, thank you. And Councillor Beer, I presume you're for? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, members. That's 9 votes for and 1 abstention. That's carried.
Thank you. To receive notification of petitions in accordance with the Council's petition scheme.
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Site inspections. None?
None.
Schedule of planning applications. DC 2403193 Holly Farm, East End Lane, East Bergholt. I will now invite the case officer, Vincent Pearce, to introduce the application to the committee. Vincent, all yours.
Thank you, Chair. With your permission, may I remove my jacket? It's quite warm at this end of the room. Thank you. Good morning, members. Good morning, public in the audience, and good morning to anyone who may be watching this or listening to it at home. This morning I'm presenting the application for Holly Farm, East End Lane, East Bergholt, and this is for the use of woodland and associated land for alternative education and special needs. It comprises the installation of 4 timber buildings and 2 timber shelters with provision of an access track, access and parking. It is a controversial application. As you will have seen from the report, there are a significant number of local objections. Hence, the report has gone into a lot of detail, as you might expect. But also in this presentation, I need to draw your attention to the fact there is a tabled paper that was circulated yesterday. We will touch on some of the matters on that. But also, I need to give you advanced warning that this presentation does include some video, and hopefully the size of the file is not so prohibitive as to prevent the video from working. But I thought it was important that members of the committee had the opportunity to effectively virtually walk the site so that they are very familiar with the site and can then put it in the context of the objections that have been received. So without further ado, East Bergholt, flashing on the screen, sitting between Colchester and Ipswich, accessed in part from the A12. It's important to understand the local road network because we will be looking at that in some detail. So the application site is shown on the screen with a green dot. It is accessed entirely from East End Lane, but that can be approached from its southern end, from Park Road, Slough Road, and from its northern end, Straight Road. And it's important to understand that because later I'll be explaining that we would prefer access to be predominantly from Straight Road. As you can see, the application site is outside of national landscape areas. It's closer to the Suffolk Coast and Heath National Landscape Area than it is to the Dedham Vale National Landscape Area. And that's an important fact that we will be looking at as we go through the presentation. It's also important to put that in the context of the neighbourhood plan, because the neighbourhood plan deals very specifically with issues of applications within designated landscapes under EB6. Now, this isn't in a designated landscape within the context of the neighbourhood plan. The neighbourhood plan focuses a lot on the Dedham Vale, as it was then AONB, but as you can see, this is closer to the other national landscape. This site is also outside of the landscape capacity assessment area that's shown on map 11 in the neighbourhood plan, and this site is not identified in any of the key views within the neighbourhood plan. More of that later. So here we have a LiDAR image. The red dot is the application site, and you can see that it actually sits on top of a plateau between 2 valleys, obviously the Stour to the south and a tributary to the north. So if we superimpose the aerial photograph, you'll see how that then fits into the landscape. So this is plateau farmland within the Suffolk Landscape Assessment Scheme. Here we have a simple drawing showing the site area. That's in red. We have Tudor Cottage on one side of the access road, and that is a listed building, grade 2, and Holly Farm. Holly Farm is actually within the control of the applicants. So this land in here is also owned by the applicant, and that may or may not be important as we go through the presentation. As you can see, the southern half of the application site is heavily wooded. That woodland extends beyond the boundary of the applicant's ownership. So we have a Mission Lane here. East End Lane curves at that point, and the access, there is an existing access that we'll see in a moment, comes off here. A track will come down, and then there'll be a reception building in this effectively grassland, meadowland, and then the buildings will actually be within the woodland. So that's East End Lane, and you can already see from that how bendy, it's not a very technical term, but it sums it up nicely, how bendy East End Lane is for part of its length. And that has been a concern expressed by lots of residents locally. Its bendiness potentially means that if there is a significant increase in traffic, that could pose a hazard, a highway hazard. A quick run through the layout in more detail. The slide will gently move upwards and I can explain the details as we go. So right at the top you have the proposed access between Tudor Cottage and Holly Farm. You then have a section of parking between two existing buildings. A track is provided with a passing place to a reception area, which includes toilets and parking, and then you go into the woodland. Now, in the woodland, we have two small timber classroom buildings, this one and this one, two open-sided shelters here and here, and we have the public footpath running through the middle of the site, so you can begin to understand some of the complexities of this proposal in so much as you have this school, special school, needs school, woodland school, with a path that runs through the middle. But that isn't so much of a problem as it might first seem, because when we look in more detail, you'll see that this side of the proposal is for primary school age students, and this side is for secondary school age pupils. There is no need for pupils to cross from one side to the other, and obviously staff will be dedicated to one side or the other. So the footpath can continue to run through the middle of the site with no obstruction. Point of information is that this woodland is private woodland. I think previously in the not too distant past, the public were able to access all of this woodland, so whether they were walking, rambling, or taking their dogs or the children out to play, they could go all through the woods. That now is not possible because fencing has been erected either side of the existing footpath, and we'll see that a little later. In terms of neighbours and objections, you'll see on the screen the immediate neighbours I've shown in that sort of pink colour, but the blue squares indicate where we've had or we've received objections. So you can see that a great many of the existing residents in Mission Lane have objected. That part of the site is effectively a paddock, or it appears to be a paddock, fenced off. And then we have sections, the woodland section, you'll see the footpath going through. You'll see the immediate neighbour at 2 Spring Cottage. You'll see the blue squares showing where we've had objections. So effectively that's open land, farmland or commercial land, woodland, and then right at the very top left-hand corner, you can just see a corner of the site, and then the public footpath continues to run down towards East End Lane. We've had some objections from residents, as you can see on the screen there. We've had a lot of objections from residents in Broome Knoll, which is some distance from the application site, but there has been a very strong peppering of objections from that direction. Some from Park Road, Slough Road, and a little further outside that little core of East End along Slough Road. Objections are principally around the question of traffic impact and highway impact, ecological impacts. We've had some concerns expressed about the impediment to the footpath. There have been some expressions of concern related to potential crime and antisocial behaviour. there are a number of other areas of concern. They are all fully explained in the report that accompanies this presentation on the agenda. And as you can see from there, they tend to be the ones that have come to the top of the list of objections. And we will look at those in detail this morning, as well as those being tackled in the report. I want to emphasise the fact that the adjoining property, Tudor Cottage, is a Grade 2 listed building, late 16th, early 17th century. A rather elegant and fine building. It has a garage tucked away that doesn't seem to be used because the access to the garage is overgrown, that is accessed from the track footpath that runs between Tudor Cottage and the application site. Our view is that, well, the view of your conservation and heritage team is that a very low level of less than substantial harm is caused to this property by the proposed development. And in the report I explain what that means in relative terms. I'm going to take you on a quick drive round the immediate area, and to do that we're going to travel northwards along East End Lane, through the bendy section, in and out of Mission Lane and up to the Grange Country Park. So here we are starting at the southern end of East End Lane. You can see that almost looks like an estate road. It's wide, it's lined with relatively modern properties. So there are no real issues in terms of highways along this section. It's like any other estate road that you might come across. On the right, in a moment, we see the entrance to Broome Knoll, which is a large modern estate. Cottages on the left. We're going to swing round to the left. Myrtle Cottage is the property on that bend, and here you can see I've slowed down, and this is now only single lane. There are some informal passing places. Here's another one that's informally used. It's just custom and practice has worn bits of the verge away, and they are used as passing places. But you can see it's very serpentine in nature, and you do have to travel slowly because your forward vision is limited. It looks as though I'm going quite fast, but I'm not. I'm doing about 20 miles an hour. That is a relatively short section. I think that section took me a minute or so, perhaps 2 minutes to navigate. And then here we have the application site coming up on the left with Mission Lane in front of us. We quickly turn the bend and we travel towards the pub. Well, we will in a moment, and we're going to go right down Mission Lane. Now, you can see these are older Victorian properties, but once we come to the end of this section, there is a small modern estate nestling in at the end around a cul-de-sac.
Sorry, have we now passed the entrance?
Yes, we will go back in a moment, Councillor Grandon, but this is just to give you a flavour of what can be found locally. And again, this is like many estates, modern estates in the district. So these are nice large houses in good-sized plots. We have more traditional Victorian houses. We're coming back out towards East End Lane. We'll turn left towards the Royal Oak and the Grange Country Park. Again, some houses on the right. There are some cars parked, so it does have narrower points, but here you can get 2 vehicles to pass. And this is why the Highway Authority would prefer access to come from this direction, because the road is wider and it's accessed from Straight Road, which by its very name suggests it is very straight, and it is. It's also de-restricted from this point, and it is wide enough for 2 vehicles to park. We'll quickly swing into the Grange Country Park, which is a large residential mobile home style setup. We do stop here, we'll just swing in and you'll see some of those in the distance there. I don't know how many units because I haven't counted, but there are a significant number of units on that site. So, Councillor Grandon, here we are. We're back now at the entrance. So on the screen, you can see Holly Farm. You can see a gated entrance, which goes into Holly Farm. We're going to swing round to the right. So that is where the proposed access will be, where that gate is open. And this is effectively that gate there, and this little entrance in the just past the road sign is where you access what is now used as the public footpath. That isn't the designated route. The footpath has been moved to the edge of the site. So at the moment you get to the walkable path through this gap in the hedge. And if we look back, we're looking back to East End Lane from inside that path. So on the left is Tudor Cottage, on the right is Holly Farm. So we travel through the gap in the hedge and we walk along where you can see this high boarded fence with effectively telegraph poles as the posts, very sturdy structure. On the right is Tudor Cottage, existing flora. You'll see the two large sheds that exist poking up above the fence. When I went the other day, it was quite sticky, the ground at this point.
Is this what will become the entrance then?
No, this is effectively the footpath that will remain walkable. So on the other side of that fence will be the access track. But what I wanted to do is allow you to walk this route virtually. So on the right, there's a gate to the paddock area that sits behind Tudor Cottage. And if we turn back, you'll see there's a range of sheds, garages and other buildings. So we're back looking towards East End Lane. And now we're swinging back, looking out onto the countryside and towards the woods. This fence gives way to a wire and post fence. So on the left is the area where the track will run down to the site. If we swing back, we'll see a large open-sided barn. We'll see an area of grassland that isn't part of the site. You'll see the woodland in view now at the top of the screen. So you can see there's open countryside to the right. That tree, or just past that tree, we'll swing left and we'll join the designated route of the footpath that goes through the woods. So this is very open landscape at this point. This is a path that is reportedly well used, and there has been concern expressed that the walk that is currently enjoyed will be less pleasurable as a result of this path now being fenced on either side. In terms of people's rights to use a public footpath, of course, they are entitled to pass and repass along that footpath, but an owner on either side can restrict access onto private land on either side, and the owner has chosen to do that. So from this point, we then enter the woodland, and again, you'll see the nature of the fencing. I'm advised that probably is, I would call it peak fencing. It has a very broad mesh, so creatures can pass through it. It's not like a fine chicken wire. So you can see just how dense the tree planting is within the woodland, and you'll notice a sign that says please keep away, or please keep to the footpath, and that has been put in by Circles Alternative Education. So at the moment you can walk through there, you have open views into the woodland, and I have to say, when I went that morning, the birds were twittering, it was lovely, the sun was glinting through the trees, it was a delightful walk. But there is no doubt that the fencing has constrained the extent to which you can get into the woodland. But of course, that is the right of the landowner. There are a number of gates installed, which, if permission is granted, I imagine would also serve the proposed use, but it does also provide the owner with access to get in and manage the woodland. And again, the gate is such that animals can pass across that route. So we are satisfied that that fence is not an impediment to the movement of animals, and that's an important element within the neighbourhood plan that states that animals should be allowed to migrate and move across sites. At the end, just to the right, is one of the farms and the large commercial buildings associated with the farm. So at its southern end, it does skirt the edge of a farmland with lots of modern sheds. We're almost in the area now where the school buildings will be, both left and right, and you'll see a bit later that the number of trees that have to be taken out are minimal. And the largest group is already classified as dead and dying. So we are satisfied that there will be an absolute negligible impact on the character of the woodland in terms of the number of trees that will be retained. There you get a much better view of, you can see probably some of the dead trees there with all the ivy on. Another point that has caused some local concern is the owner has installed CCTV cameras so they have some surveillance over their land. In many ways, that could be considered a good thing because you'll notice that there are a number of concerns related to potential crime and antisocial behaviour. So the owner would be able to monitor the woodland and ensure that they were able to nip any of that sort of, let's call it nonsense, in the bud. Quick scan here, you can see the sign that says private woodland, and here you actually see almost the full height, the stand of trees. That will be unaltered effectively were you to grant planning permission. So we go back to the access, and remember I pointed out the white gates. Those white gates will be moved back in order to create a 5-metre gap between the edge of East End Lane and the gate. That allows a vehicle to pull entirely off of East End Lane, so there shouldn't be any vehicle sticking out, either if it's coming out or going in, obstructing the highway on that bend. Behind that will be a slip drain which will take water to a drainage area, and of course that means that there shouldn't be water running out onto the highway. Obviously highways were concerned that in cold weather that could freeze. Well, that has been dealt with. In terms of parking, the 2 large sheds that I pointed out on that video, that's the track that'll be formed, and sitting in front of those buildings will be 5 spaces for members of staff. As we travel towards the southern end, you get the reception building and 3 parking spaces. Now in the report I've said these are too small to provide disabled bays, so these would need to be enlarged. You'll notice in the report there's a lot of discussion about what is the appropriate number of parking spaces. Our view as officers is that the scheme should provide 14 off-street parking spaces, and I know the agent has indicated that this isn't the sort of educational use that fits easily into our parking guidance standards, and they suggest that they have delivered enough spaces for the use they are undertaking based on their experience. But I think in terms of the concern that's been expressed locally about traffic generation, we should play on the cautious side and take a precautionary approach to ensure that if we have a little too many parking spaces, that's better than not having enough and people tending to park out on East End Lane. I think it is possible for the agent to incorporate some additional spaces. And were you minded to grant permission, I'd be suggesting that we get a drawing showing those additional spaces before permission is granted. Clearly, you may wish to ask the agent or the applicant as to their view on the number of parking spaces, but I'm told that they can be accommodated if that is the will of the committee. So here we have in the dark black, I suppose black is always dark, isn't it? The dashed lines, the designated public footpath routes, and you'll notice the brown route is where this alternative path has been created. Now, the public right-of-way team feel it isn't expedient to take action for the informal moving of that part of the path because it provides a suitable alternative. But you will notice in the recommendation that if members are minded to grant planning permission, we are suggesting that the agent, or the applicant, pays sufficient funds to the public right-of-way team to seek to formally divert the route. At the moment, you could still walk this designated route, but you'd have to pass through between Holly Farm and this first building, and those gates may sometimes be locked. So to some extent, the official route at this northern end is obstructed, but an alternative has already been provided. And on that basis, the public right-of-way team have indicated they're unlikely to be taking any immediate action to restore the walkability of the existing route. We need to dwell on BNG because obviously the existing woodland has a lot of value, and the neighbourhood plan does concentrate a lot of attention on biodiversity net gain. And indeed, we need to look at policy EB8 in the neighbourhood plan, and we'll come to that in a moment. But what we can see from the screen is that there will be a reduction in grassland area. There will be some increase in hard standing area, so that's not particularly good for biodiversity. There will be a relatively large increase in mixed scrub, and of course the site doesn't have buildings at the moment. It will have buildings in the future, so that takes away another 96 square metres of biodiversity. All in all, there's an extra 200 metres of hedging that wasn't there before. We are confident that the applicant can deliver 10% BNG. That is the mandatory requirement. But you'll notice from the report that our ecology officer has asked for additional information just to confirm how that and where that is being delivered. You'll have seen on the plan that part of the application site includes some ponds. They are attractive to great crested newts. There may be other mammals, protected species on the site. Well, not may, there are. I think it will be important for us to identify those areas within the woodland within which the pupils will have free rein, free access, and those parts of the woodland that effectively ought to be closed off and retained for BNG, nature conservation purposes. And it isn't entirely clear from the plans that have been submitted where that boundary would be. And on that basis, we are suggesting that if you agree the recommendation, the Chief Planning Officer is able then to identify those areas, get the agreement of our ecology officer in discussion with the applicant around the nature of how that BNG is going to be provided. But it is clear 10% is being offered and is deliverable. That is your policy. That's also the mandatory requirement. This plan, which is also in the report, identifies in brown just those few areas where trees will be lost. The buildings themselves, I think, are particularly sympathetic. That is timber shingles on the wall, on the roof, and you'll notice that the buildings, the classroom buildings, are actually raised off the ground with traditional standing stones. Normally you see them, they're almost they are mushroom shape. That allows air to pass under the building. That's good for the timber structure. It lifts the building out of any dampness. And the biggest benefit is, of course, that you're not putting foundations in that would cut or sever tree roots. So this is a very sympathetic approach to developing within the woods. And being timber itself and the timber shingle, it should harmonise very well in a woodland setting. That's why we're less worried about the impact of these buildings on the landscape and on the character of the woodland than we might otherwise be with a different sort of building. Inside the building, traditionally you have the teacher at one end, you have some desks, you have a toilet. The wide overhanging roof provides some shelter, but it also allows 2 covered porch areas to be introduced. And again, the reception building, from the same idiom, using the same materials. There'll be space for staff to greet people as they come in. Again, the overarching roof and porch areas. And again, even the toilet block has been carefully designed to harmonise with the overall theme. The open shelters, again, have the shingle roof that allows children to sit outside and to be taught in the open air, but also be protected from the elements. This screen shows how the primary and secondary split works, with the path in yellow running through the middle. Now the question that has exercised us all is, if members were to grant planning permission, and I think it's been put in these terms, could the school suddenly grow like Topsy? So when we think we've got a handle on the impact, suddenly we find it gets bigger and bigger, and those impacts get larger and larger, particularly in terms of traffic. Well, what we're recommending, and the applicant has agreed to self-impose a maximum number of children of 20. That is a small number of children. And that helps in terms of traffic generation, but also on-site parking requirements. We are expecting to restrict the use to this particular type of education rather than any other educational use. And we are also suggesting that we remove permitted development rights. So a school has permitted development rights that allow expansion without the need for permission. We are suggesting those rights are removed. So what you see on the screen ought to be, with these in place, what you get going forward. And if the agent acting for the applicant wanted to expand that use, they would have to come back to this council for a further planning permission. So overall, with the controls we are suggesting, we are satisfied that on the exercising our balance, we think the balance clearly tips in favour of supporting this proposal, because whilst the site is outside of the settlement boundary and is impacted by SPO3, where you might normally expect a restrictive approach to be applied to development in the countryside, Table 5 of your local plan, which sets out the exceptions, includes for the provision of school under LP31. This fits neatly into one of those exceptions. So in that sense, it is in accordance, in land use terms, with your local plan. And on that basis, we are suggesting the balance, despite some of the adverse impacts, tips in favour of granting planning permission. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Vincent. Questions? Councillor Beer.
Could I, Mr. Chairman, thank Vincent for his very clear and helpful video. I thought that was excellent, and it certainly saved a lot of site inspections and what have you. But the detail you went into, which I know we come to expect from you, was great. I haven't got any questions for you. I've got for other people. Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Holt.
Vincent, you said the access, I believe, was up to 5 metres with the gate moved inward. Do we know what sort of vehicles will use the site? It's just that from educational needs, etc., a long wheelbase minibus has a 6.7 metre wheelbase and length. So if we're expecting minibuses to be used on site, that will hang it into the highway. 5 metres would accommodate a car and perhaps a small van, but obviously education needs and usage would suggest that minibuses may be used, and a 16-seater minibus, a long wheelbase minibus, would in effect be longer than 5 metres.
I think, Councillor Holt, that is a good point, because we do expect, and we can ask, or you can ask the applicant how they intend to get their students to the site. But I see no intrinsic reason why we couldn't require those gates to be set back a little further in order that a minibus could get off the carriageway. Because the 5 metres would allow a car, but it also might allow somebody to park in front of it, so an extra metre, 1.7 metres. I personally would think that is a good idea. That way we can be sure that the minibus isn't causing a hazard by having the back of the minibus sticking out into East End Lane. I think that could be incorporated as a condition. Were members minded to grant permission? Thank you, Councillor Hall.
Councillor Maybury?
Thank you. My question, a couple of questions. First of all, what is the access to the buildings? Is it steps or something? If they're on saddle stones, as we used to call them. And my second is the hard standing. Is that permeable? Thank you.
We would expect the access to the buildings to be ramped. We haven't got that detail, and again, I think it's important that we condition that to be absolutely sure. I'm sure, were you to ask the applicant if they're speaking, I can't imagine that you would have a send facility and not make appropriate arrangements. But to be fair, you've spotted that it's not shown on the drawing, so I think we should condition it. That is a brilliant idea. We will make sure that the hard standing areas are permeable. What we don't want is sort of large areas of concrete or tarmac, because we want to try and retain the character of the countryside hereabouts. So I'm sure it'll be loose gravel, something along those lines that would allow water to percolate. But again, we can condition, if members are minded to grant permission, the nature of those hard standings to ensure not only that the character is right, but they are permeable. So again, that could be a condition, and I would absolutely support that as an additional condition.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Carruthers?
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure whether this is a question for you or somebody else, but I read the ecological report and it mentions that there were badgers in the area, but it's actually blacked out because to protect the badgers. I don't know whether you're allowed to say whether the set is within the boundary of the site. Is it nearby? Are the badgers using the woodland? And if so, would they be able to get through that fence? Because I suspect they might not, but I don't know.
There are badgers. The site is away from the area with the buildings. And I think if we are careful around how we define the area within which the students have free rein, I think the badgers will be left undisturbed. As to whether or not a badger could pass through the fence, I think, to be absolutely sure, we could have another condition that ensures that we make appropriate arrangements for badger passing places so that they can move from one side to the other. I'm sure the applicant would support that, because I have asked them about the badgers, and their answer, and you might want to ask them themselves, but the answer is that the students wouldn't be disturbing the badgers by going up to the sets. What would happen is they could place these sort of wildlife cameras close to the sets so that the students could be observing what goes on from within the classroom, and that sounds admirable. But I think you're right. I think we should make sure that there are sort of badger passing places within the fencing, and I'm sure we can come up with a design that makes that possible.
Yeah. Thank you. That's reassuring. They'll probably, if the badgers are using the wood for foraging, you'll probably, you'll be able to see their paths. They're normally quite obvious, and it's great that they're going to have cameras for the children to see them. Thank you.
Councillor Davis.
I do actually think Councillor Register was ahead of me in question, and Councillor Grandon.
Just simply, in terms of the access to the site, the roads, how busy are they? Because there's no idea of what traffic levels there are currently, and therefore, in terms of additional traffic, it's difficult to judge that in context.
The day I went, there was nothing but that, you might say, because I was there and I wasn't there at the school time, which is absolutely true. In terms of traffic numbers, I don't think there has been a traffic count, but the agent may be able to put me right on that. But when you look at how many houses are in the vicinity, in the report I do calculate the number of houses that are at the top end and at the southern end, and it's not inconsequential in terms of the number of traffic movements that must already occur from the people who already live in that area. You would expect the people at the northern end probably to use straight road. It sounds as though I'm waffling, and to some degree I might be, but I have estimated that peak time there might be 14 traffic movements, absolute maximum. Now, if it is a minibus and people are being collected and there are a number of people on the minibus, that number 14 will go down. 14, having discussed it with the Highway Authority, and I'll see on the tabled papers that they have provided further comment. In their view, 14 is not a severe increase. They're quite satisfied that 14 would not pose severe harm either to highway safety or capacity. So it is a low number, is probably the best answer. But you'll notice on the table paper, I have amended the recommendation slightly to reflect the fact that they have raised no objection.
Councillor Grandon.
Thank you. On page 48 of our report, it does go into detail about the number of parking spaces required at 15. You did cover parking spaces in your presentation. Could you please clarify, because I didn't see anywhere near 15 spaces, so can you please clarify how you got to the number of spaces that they're now providing and how that is now seen adequate, whereas in the report it was saying 15, please? Absolutely.
The number of spaces I have calculated is based on your adopted standards. So I've looked at the size of the proposal, the type of uses, and that has theoretically come up with a number of spaces that are required. The applicant, as we saw on one of the drawings, has provided 5 at the northern end and 3, so they provided 8. So there is a deficiency. What we're suggesting is that if you're minded to grant planning permission, we have the ability to require the applicant to provide those extra spaces within the site. So at the moment, there isn't a drawing showing the extra spaces, but what we're saying is they cannot bring the use into being until they have provided the additional spaces. So they would have to provide the 14, not the 8 they're proposing.
Oh, so they will, sorry, can I just clarify that further, please? So in fact, what we saw is not going to be the end result. Before they, when we give planning permission, if we do, it would be for 14 places, parking spaces.
Absolutely correct. You've nailed it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Davis.
Thank you. You mentioned you were going to try and encourage people to come down the straight road. Is it possible to put any signage up so that people are really encouraged to go down that direction. I know that particular area, and it is quite nasty, especially if you're on a bicycle.
Thinking about it, I think that's a brilliant suggestion. I suspect we wouldn't be able to put signs on East End Lane itself, but there's nothing stopping members requiring the applicant to put signs up within the site, so that every time you enter or leave, there's a sign that says, we ask you to enter and leave by way of Straight Road. So that would then supplement what we're suggesting in terms of the access routing agreement. That can only be informal. We can't, I mean, if a driver chooses to go southwards, there's probably nothing that can be done. But I think if the operator were to say to people arriving, look, it's in all of our interests that you come in via the north, I think that's a worthwhile step. And again, if members are minded to grant permission, I would happily accept that they also have to put signage at the entrance for staff and visitors to say, please work with us to ensure that you enter and leave via, and you could even have a little map on that plan to show the desired route. I'm trying to remember if it's in the report or not, but what I would also suggest is that the applicant enter into a parish liaison agreement. Now, these have worked very successfully in mid-Suffolk, and I think probably you've had some in Babergh. That way, the operator of the use would sit down with the parish council, perhaps once or twice a year, and they could discuss all kinds of issues. How's the use going? The operator might want to invite them in to look at the facilities, but it then allows the parish to say, well, look, we've had these complaints. Is there anything you can do to try and deal with this? And it creates a much friendlier dialogue, so it becomes far less antagonistic, and it opens the door for that dialogue, which we found, certainly in mid-Suffolk, to be very useful. Every parish that's had a development where this has operated has said it's been very successful, and it changes the dynamics completely. But again, you might want to ask the operator whether they'd be willing to enter into such agreements, so they'd have these informal meetings on a regular basis, and it just allows those issues to be teased out and sorted out without it having to come back to the council either through enforcement or some other action.
Thank you. Good suggestions. On page 29, environmental health response, they're talking about asking for the following conditions to be added to any permissions granted around, mostly the construction period, if planning permissions granted. I couldn't spot that listed at the back, but I might have missed it.
That may be because I haven't hidden it, but you might think I have. In the recommendation, I've said as required by environmental health. So that would include all of those. And I think it is important we understand the construction, because none of us want the idea of children being taught in a cold and windswept building. So they are keen to ensure that insulation is adequate. But that's also covered under building regs, but it is covered. Unfortunately, I summarised it in a way that wasn't particularly clear, so I apologise for that. Councillor Davis.
Thank you. And just a small final point, could we have a comfort break at some convenient point, please?
Okay. Any more questions? Councillor Maybury, did you have one?
Yes, I did. Thank you. Page 17 states that there are no tree preservation orders in or adjacent to the site. So basically, the landowner, if they wish, could cut all those trees down, if they so wished.
Yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Holt?
Yeah, a couple of three. Utilities, sewage, etc., and clearing away that the access to the cabins. How is that going to be accessed?
That is a good point that needs to be conditioned, and I think you may well also want to ask the operator how they imagine that's going to work.
I will.
Sorry, can I quickly jump back to the point made by Councillor Maybury? it is our intention that we, if you're minded to grant permission, we have a condition that says no tree shall be felled. So in that sense, we would then have some control, and the operator of this use couldn't then go wholesale with the chainsaw and fell them.
Councillor Holt, you had another question?
Yep. The external lighting on site, do we have any restrictions in place to control that? Obviously, during the winter months, it will be on a lot longer, and obviously that will take away from the natural setting of the woodland. So what sort of controls and what restrictions are there set to control that?
We are conditioning that we need to see all details of external lighting. One, because, as you say, we don't want the woodland to be aglow at night, but also in terms of wildlife, we need to ensure that it's wildlife sensitive lighting. So that is something that would have to be addressed before the use could come into force. And I can see where you're going, and it's a concern we've shared, because if people are accessing the facilities from the reception area in winter, clearly at 4 o'clock it's going to be dark. What is that? Are we going to have people going through the woods with a torch? That's not ideal, is it? So absolutely that will be conditioned, and the details will have to be agreed. So there is a restriction in terms of the hours of use, so it won't be glowing all through the night and into the evening. So lighting will be restricted to the hours of use of the building unless there's some sort of passive system, because obviously there is a need to have some security for the facilities. But that will all be sorted out through the condition and through the advice of our lighting experts in environmental health and our ecologists.
Obviously, the concerns there is that wildlife at night, if it's some sort of passive system, they set the lights off, then that's going to really change the habitat that they're used to. So really, we could do, I would feel happy in knowing what type of system is going to be put in, so that we have good knowledge and understanding of what it's going to look like if and when it's got permission, and if and when it's built.
Yeah, our ecologists are very familiar with the issue. We have one of your standing conditions now is wildlife sensitive lighting. We can devise, or our colleagues can ensure that such lighting doesn't cause the issues you've pointed out, Councillor Holt. Some of it is ensuring that the lighting is shielded, is directed and targeted, and is low level in terms of the luminance. There are all kinds of techniques they can use. We are satisfied that it is now possible to get the best of both worlds, to provide some lighting that doesn't disturb wildlife.
Thank you. Councillor Grandin.
Thank you. I haven't noticed it, but perhaps you could let me know. Are there hard-standing type pathways along the, within the site for people to get to the classrooms and so on? I didn't see that. So if there are not, though, then it's just going to be filthy, isn't it?
Part of the joy of the Woodland School is, I imagine, the children will be well equipped with Wellingtons, and they will be enjoying the pleasures of play and access in the wild. So yeah, we wouldn't encourage hard surfacing. We would want it to stay exactly as it is, and I'm sure the kids will have a whale of a time if you grant planning permission. It just means there'll be mud on the floor in the classrooms, there'll be mud on the boots, and if they have a fall, there'll probably be mud on them as well. But I couldn't think of anything more pleasurable than having a quick play in the mud, but that might just be me. But
Councillor Beer, you had a question.
Yes, I got through for the applicant, but just to point to the officer, if we were minded to go along with this, I'm always concerned about all the conditions we put on, and sometimes we have a long list of them, and quite rightly in this case, and through our discussions and questions to you, already there's a few come up of extras, but could I be assured that we would work as closely, which I'm sure we will, with the applicant to try and get round these and achieve them? Because like the Parkham one as an example, that's quite simple and straightforward. They must be able to find extra places where they could happen and everybody be happy. But I wouldn't want us to add on lots of conditions, Mr. Chairman, where we just cause delay upon delay, because that isn't good for the locals either. So I just need to be reassured that we're not just going to end up with 2 pages when 1.5 might have done. Thank you.
I'm happy to give you my personal commitment, Councillor Beer and members of the committee, that I will dedicate whatever time is needed in order to ensure that those conditions are dealt with appropriately and quickly. Were you minded to grant planning permission? I'm also more than happy to commit to joining the parish liaison sessions for an initial period to ensure that that dynamic is encouraged to flourish.
Councillor Rhodes, now you.
Just one quick question, Chair. Could we have assurance from the Acting Chief Planning Officer that the public rights of way issues are appropriately addressed when they're dealt with by yourself to some extent? Although they're subject to a statutory obligation, I did notice that there's a clause that says that the hedgerow should be 2 metres back from the edge of the right-of-way, and on Vincent's excellent video presentation, they weren't. So I think there's some really prickly issues around the public right-of-way, and particularly ensuring that the permissive right-of-way is changed to an appropriately recorded diversion.
So, getting a handle on the facts of the application, but speaking more generally, I mean, the enforcement of the footpath would rest with the county council and their team, and clearly they've identified an obligation that's been carried forward into the recommendation that would deal with an amendment to the route, and one would expect that will be suitably designed and managed, but that does ultimately fall to the county. But part of the purpose of the obligation is to secure the funds to put that right.
Chairman, could I just comment on that last point? I actually sit on that committee at Suffolk County Council, and the comments that you made and your response to that is quite correct. That would be all taken into consideration, and they do go into great detail on it. So I think you could rest assured that if that's what was wanted, it's most likely could happen.
Councillor Beer's reassurance is very welcome. Thank you.
Did you have another question?
Yes, because that's Councillor Wyman's question, the officer's answer, and Councillor Beer's comment has made me think. So if hedges have to be 2 metres away from the footpath, does that mean that the footpath is just 2 metres wide, or does that mean that the whole thing will be 4 metres wide, or even more? If you get my drift. If you're walking down currently a public right-of-way, they're anything between 1 metre and usually 1.5, right? So if you have hedging either side that has to be 2 metres wider than that, then that will be a very large amount coming out of someone's land. So that would be it could be anything up to about 6 feet. Sorry, I can only do feet. I can't do meters.
I could deal with that question. Where I'm advocating additional planting is at the northern end, and that planting could actually be within the site on the inside of the fence. Because you're absolutely right, Councillor Maybury, what we don't want to have is planting that when it starts to grow, effectively reduces the width of the path until there's nothing left to walk through. So what we are suggesting is that the additional planting be within the site, and it is set back from the fence so that when it does start to expand, if it does anything, it'll slightly overhang the path but it'll be above the fence line, so it won't interfere with your ability to walk freely along it.
Okay, well, I'll leave that with you then. But
It was a good spot. Absolutely, I understand the concern.
Okay, I'll leave it with you then. Thank you.
Yeah, two things. Is there a guarantee of use of the site? Because it's in the papers, it's a SEND facility, but this is a private application. This is nothing to do with Suffolk Educational Organisation. So it's a private entity. If it wasn't to be used for SEND, could it be used for other alternative usage, i.e. daily camps, daily functions, school holiday functions? And my second point, you mentioned the hedging. We've had assurance that the fencing isn't restrictive to wildlife. If that hedging is of a dense nature, that could be restrictive to wildlife and crossing into the woodland.
The condition I'm suggesting would prevent the site being used for other purposes, including other educational purposes. But you have made me think a little bit more, and you might want to extend the suggested condition to include, in the event of the use ceasing, the buildings shall be removed and the land restored to its original condition. So at least you have the confidence of knowing that if in 30 years' time or whatever it is, that use ceases, they have to be taken away and it reverts back to the woodland. That seems eminently sensible. It's also made me think about what other permitted development rights might exist. And there is a right to the temporary use of land. I think if you were to extend the conditions we're suggesting to take away the right to 14-day and 28-day activities that often apply to landowners, in that way you can't have paintballing or any other sort of activity without the further grant of planning permission. I think that would deal with the concern that you've quite rightly explored, and I think in that way it means that the applicant can get on and deal with the business they know, and it's the business they want to run, but it does limit their ability then to diversify into all kinds of other stuff that you wouldn't necessarily want to see. That seems eminently sensible.
And the hedging?
And the hedging, we will ensure that the right balance is struck between good passing points for wildlife. I mean, wildlife passes through hedges, as we all know, but I hear what you say. One of the things I've been have I struggled? I think I have struggled with it, and you might want to ask the applicant, because at the moment it's very open, we've got that broad mesh, you might want to ask the applicant, do they have any concerns that people passing through the woodland can see into the site and see the children playing and enjoying the outside experience? Because part of me was thinking, do you actually want to create some sort of barrier so that isn't possible? I'm just thinking from a safeguarding point of view, and obviously safeguarding sits with the applicant. But it might be an interesting question to ask them how they see that working when any member of the public can be walking through. Now you may say, well, that can happen anyway. I can think of lots of primary schools where a public footpath skirts the edge of the playing field and you have an open mesh fence. So perhaps I'm worrying unnecessarily, but it is something that has crossed my mind.
Okay, we'll have Councillor Davis's comfort break at this moment in time, and we'll come back. If you have any more questions you think about in the meantime, hang on to them, don't discuss them with anybody else, and we'll pick them up after the comfort break. So it is now 10:40, so we're back here at 10:45. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you. Have any more questions popped up while you've been having a break? No? Speaking as the applicant,
Yes, thank you.
you have 3 minutes to address the committee, and then will you please wait for questions afterwards?
Indeed, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time this morning. I think it's important to note that... Apologies. Thank you very much for your time this morning. I think it's important to start with an explanation that we are a community interest company, and we failed to interact with the community initially in our first application. And I think there's been some fallout from that. We are very well experienced in the services that we offer. We've been established for 17 years. The woodland is the asset that we need. It's the space that enables us to offer therapeutic intervention to our young people with special educational needs. It's vital that we work in harmony with nature. It may not appear that way when we're putting hard standing buildings in, but ultimately we're looking to work in synchronised with the environment rather than using any concrete or damaging anything. We're looking to maintain and better the woodland space especially. We work in really small numbers with our young people. We have now established a link with the parish council, and we're working with them on a few community projects. One is that we're doing planters in the village car park, and that's the sort of thing that we should look to extend. We are a community interest company and look to work with the local community, local parish councillors, local community members. It's something that we didn't do from the get-go, but will be part of the nature of our business. A good example was made about wildlife cameras. If you look at our website, that's something that we actively do right now on our site in Essex. We use trap cameras every week. We record wildlife as part of our lessons. You'll see loads of footage of the work that we do and of the wildlife that we support. I thank you very much for your time, and would also like to sort of reinforce that there is allocated space for additional parking on site. Hasn't been noted on the design as yet, but we have already sort of allocated a space for that. Thank you again.
Thank you. Just sit tight. Do you want to start with some of the questions that were raised earlier, Councillor Beer, or are you going to start?
That's fine, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. SEND, it's a very worthwhile organisation, and it's something that commendable. But what I really wanted to know from you was whether you would be prepared to take up this suggestion that was made by our Chief Planning Officer, the officer involved, to meet and liaise with the Parish Council once a year, because that does work in other places, and I've seen it in action, and I know the County Council does it a lot with the household pits and things that we have to deal with. So I think it would work here. So that's one question. The other question is the park, and you did just briefly highlight it, but it does say 15, I think it's right, isn't it? And you've heard the councillors mention that. We firmly believe more is better. So I think if you can accommodate that, and it's not a great cost extra, I wouldn't have thought in the scheme of things, and if you could do that, that would be excellent. I've got something where I checked that you were doing 10% of something which was mandatory, and I've forgotten what it referred to.
That's the BNG.
That's right, yeah. That was well, we would certainly expect that, but if you can do more, then that's good, and I'm sure Vincent will discuss that with you in detail later. And my final bit was the signs. I think that's an important part. Information signs, and I think if you could adapt them so that they could point directions in and out, and the best way to stick to. I know on some of the applications we deal with at county, they have things fitted in their vehicles to track them which way they go, but I don't know whether you can get to that stage. And the final part is, if we were minded to approve this, how quickly would you get this all up and running? Because there's these additional conditions which members might want to add on, but it's not to delay it or to cause you more grief, it's just to improve the situation and to give encouragement to the local people that we're trying to tie up all the loose ends. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We would implore our relationship with the Parish Council. We've already extended, made an... Is that better? Thank you, sorry. We have already made an extension and are working in partnership on a small project. It's something that we do on our existing site in Essex, and it's something that we will definitely be doing as a CIC. Not just, it's important that we are part of the local community and we are taking action that our young people need to see positive interactions with the local community so that they feel able to communicate and interact and be positive parts of the community. So it's something that's par the course, if you like. Car parking. There is a space allocated with a large open barn that could be used immediately without affecting the site and any BNG. It would easily hold 14 vehicles on its own. BNG, we will not struggle to hit 20%. If anything, we'll supersede that exponentially, I should think. We have some very, very big plans to make the space very, very wildlife friendly. We are around habitat enrichment. That's part of the education that we do in the BTECs that we deliver in land-based studies. It's important that we work in harmony with the environment, otherwise we'd operate in classrooms, not in the spaces that we need. We need them to be in nature, to understand nature. We need to be respectful, and they need to be respectful of that. There'll be a full traffic plan in regards to signage, but again, this is something that we educate our young people on. So they'd be aware of, we do travel training with our young people, and interior signage on our site would be a really good example of that. We also work with the private contractors, so anybody that was driving a minibus or a transport vehicle, we would have the right to refuse their entry or exit to our site if they don't follow instruction. And that has happened previously, where a taxi's driven too fast, and we've said, if that happens again, you won't return. It's really important that we work closely with the transport services and the chaperones that operate within them. We work sort of symbiotically in regards to the approach and offer that we support the young people during their travel, during their time with us, and then their travel back again. Oh yes, and we would have no issue with increasing the setback of the entrance to accommodate for a larger wheelbase body. It's not something that's commonly used for us.
I didn't catch that at all. Can you repeat?
We'd have no issue with increasing the setback of the driveway of the entrance to accommodate a larger vehicle. It isn't something that's usually accessed for our service, but I think it could well be, so much better be safe than be sorry.
If that's the case, then what would you expect to be transporting your client? Cars all the time?
It tends to be a private car with a chaperone, or if at most it would be a small minibus, seating sort of 12 to 14. But usually it is a private car. So there's one point I failed to respond to, which was timeline for us, we're operating on a temporary site at present over in Essex, and we have young people that are really keen to move to their, sort of put, excuse the pun, but put roots down and have some real ownership and see some longevity of the site. So we'll be looking to move on this as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Maybury, did you want to ask a question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for coming to talk to us today, because it's really, really helpful. Couple of questions that I have, please, and I have to write them down, because otherwise we get a bit confused. The buildings, I've got two questions for those. The buildings, what access is there going to be? Because that wasn't on the plan. So is it going to be a ramp? Is it going to be stairs? And do you, if you're going to have to put hard standing down for that, please guarantee that it's permeable. And the second is, insulation is really good in the building, and because this is in a woodland, could we have wool insulation, which would help our hard-pressed farmers? So if you can answer those two first, that would be really helpful.
Can I just interrupt? Can you just ask the first one, because nobody else caught your second one, and we'll come back to you before. Thank you. If you do the first one first.
Thank you for your questions. In regards to the buildings and the access, we have young people with mobility issues and hypermobility. It's unlikely that we'd ever put down a hard standing unless we would need to. If we did, it would certainly be permeable. It would, again, we have to work as closely to nature as possible, and we don't really want to disturb the ground in any way, unless it's extremely necessary. We have young people with mobility issues at present, and we have various supports in place. In regards to wool insulation, I'll pass that across to Planning Officer Chris.
Can I ask Councillor Maybury to repeat the question about insulation?
Yes, I would be delighted to. Just to clarify, first of all, it would be a ramp access, would it? A ramp access.
That sorry, up to the buildings, yes.
Yeah. Right. And my other question is, because this is I'm going to say an ecological sensitive area, could the insulation on the buildings be wool?
If I can step in there and help a little bit by way of reply, the buildings themselves are very, very light touch in their structural form. They actually are right on the edge of building regulations, in the sense of not intended necessarily to heat the buildings at all. There's no issue with directing natural materials for insulation to ensure we don't use horrible expanding foams and polycarbonate materials. But it's, as you'll have seen, two of the buildings within the woodland are completely open plan. They're just a rain shelter, really. So we could take that as a condition or an informative if that's what the planning officers want to do, but it's, I say, there's going to be more effort by the applicant team on ensuring these are fit for purpose, as opposed to the building reg side of it, if that makes sense.
Councillor Register.
Going back to the accessibility for mobility impaired students, the toilets didn't look necessarily accessible. They just looked like standard toilets. Are they designed to be usable by somebody in a wheelchair? And the other question that leads, if you were leaving a light touch on the paths between going to the buildings, if they're not metalled, that means that they, or not smooth, that means they will be difficult to use in a wheelchair in the sort of weather we've been currently getting, where it's pouring with rain. So if you could answer those two questions, please.
Thank you. We would have wheelchair access to the toilets, but wheelchair access across the site wouldn't necessarily be required. It's rare that we'd have somebody in wheelchair. It's not that we are not accessible, but it's a rarity. And there would be a space provided for wheelchair access, but not across the whole of the site. But certainly in regards to reception area, it would be wheelchair accessible.
Councillor Wyman.
Thank you, Chair. Could the applicant give us a bit more information on we talked a little bit about it early on, which was what utilities will be provided in terms of will there be mains power to the buildings? I guess so, I don't know. Will you have a clargester for the toilets, or will it be, I suspect so again, but could you give some clarity around that, please? And also, could you just, for my clarification, are Circle's Alternative Education Limited, who is shown as the applicant, does the applicant actually own the freehold of the site, or are they leaseholders?
Hello, my name's Brad Caleb, also from Circles. I'll pick up on the power and kind of utilities first. The site does have an electric supply to there, so there is already a current existing electric on site. And for the kind of the foul drainage, there's the primary option is to connect into mains drains, which are accessible in the road. And then if that becomes impossible in practice when we start to get into the site, then it would be into a clargester. But our preference is to connect to mains drains, which are in the road, where the road bends round, where the planning officers drove round. It follows that road around, so it's kind of on the boundary there. So that's the main plan for that.
And Chair, and the freehold leasehold
Sorry.
question, please.
Did you? Sorry.
It was just there was two questions. There was the question about is the applicant Education Alternative Solutions, are they the freeholders of the site, or are they leaseholders?
Apologies. So Circles are a leaseholder of the site. Yes.
Follow-up question, please, Chair. So, how much control do the leaseholders have then in terms of the length of the lease, and how much can they control the site in terms of, we've talked about all kinds of things that relate to use of the land. Have they got a clear demise?
Yes, so just to clarify, so as much as they're a leaseholder, it is a sister organisation that owns the freehold. So we have free access. There is no kind of...
Thank you.
Councillor Carruthers.
Thank you, Chair. Thinking about biodiversity net gain, I noticed in the pack and on the map that there used to be a pond near. Is that going to be restored at all? Because it sounded as though it was sort of filled in with stuff, and that would obviously really increase the value to wildlife and be good for the children as well to see that and do pond dipping and that.
If I can come back on that, there was a pond. If you study Ordnance Survey maps, it's marked up. It's the start of a drainage system in the local area where the water initially collects and then discharges off towards the east. The pond, I think historically by the previous owners, has been not maintained and overlooked. We haven't included within this application, as part of the B&G approach, restoration of the pond. That would allow us to take the B&G offer even further. But it's quite complex to present that as a wetland habitat, although the credits for B&G actually score much higher by dealing with wetland and semi-wetland areas. It's definitely something we've discussed as a team. It's on the agenda for later, and it would fit within their education programmes to do so. So it's not being overlooked.
I've also liaised with Suffolk's FIPL Farming in Protected Landscapes department around this. So it's something that we have seriously considered already, and it is part of the plan.
Councillor Holt, you want to...
Yeah, picking up on the sewage really, a little bit concerned you don't actually know the best way to take away the sewage. To go underground seems rather disruptive to the woodland and the wildlife. Really, I'd like to know, and I don't suppose we're going to know, what is your preference? I think you indicated to go underground, but as I say, that to me would cause a lot of disruption, take a lot of time, and you'll have to go through a lot of roots and trees, etc., to probably get that. And the other thing I was going to mention was the condition or possible condition about tying down the use of the site. Would you be favourable in having that condition put on so that we have assurance that this is a one use and a one use only in its lifetime for this type of facility?
If I can come back on those 2 points, I don't know if Mr. Pearce can put up the site layout plan with ease. It would help clarify the sewage route. The sewage route, if it's placed into the ground to pick up on the main sewer, is outside the woodland. It's from the northern area buildings where the car parking area sits, and it would run due east to pick up the road, if you like, on that S-bend. The gradient levels work that could be done without pumping. So it's outside the woodland, so it's not a tree route issue as such.
Okay. Vincent, can you?
Thank you, Chair. We just wait. Mandy's just going to put the slide up referred to by Mr. Board. I think I would share Councillor Holt's concern if we were looking at wholesale undergrounding of pipes. I think from the description provided by Mr. Board, that isn't going to be the case. But if it is, we could always resort to a condition that requires any of those pipes to be installed by hand digging or microbore to minimise impact on roots. What we don't want is a mini digger to go in and just go wild and create havoc. That doesn't seem to be the sort of thing that the operators would want to contemplate. So there are ways around it, but if we can actually see that on the screen, which is there, through you, Chair, am I able to ask Mr. Board to describe that route one more time, just so we can now see it with the benefit of the plan? And one other point, if I may, Chair, I might be abusing the ability you've given me, but if the applicants are leaseholders and a sister company owns the land, if you're minded to grant planning permission, you may want to make it absolutely clear that in granting planning permission, if that's what you want to do, you're not conveying any authority to use the blue land or the building on the blue land for any educational purpose. It's just belt and braces, just in case there's any confusion. They would have to come back and ask for permission to do so. But on the screen, may we, Chair, through you, Mr. Board, describe the route of that one more time and we can see it. I'll try and mark it, if I can, with the cursor as you describe it.
So the main sewer exists in the road just to the east of the site.
Yeah.
With the topography, the natural fall is from north to south as your cursor's moving, both in the road as well. So the toilet, as marked, would be a connection due east to pick up the main sewer. So we're outside the woodland in its entirety.
I think Councillor Holt's more concerned about the toilets in the classrooms, which are clearly down here.
Sorry, I should have picked that. They would be compostable, off-grid.
In which case, Chair, you may want to condition that just so that there's no concern afterwards. That would be ideal, wouldn't it? Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so we're happy to make that condition, yes. Councillor, maybe you have another question?
Yeah, one final question. I'm not going to look at you, sorry, so people can hear. I apologise. You have been talking about that you've been liaising with the parish council. Thank you. Would you be looking in the future to actually having volunteers to help from the village? Is this what you're anticipating in the future?
Thank you for your question. I'd imagine it would probably be a reversal of that role. Rather than them to volunteer, more that we'd volunteer. So if I talk about the relationship that we have in Stock in Essex, we're working in collaboration with the parish council to pond dip the local pond. It's something that we do with the students anyway. We've fixed a stile, some community fencing. It may well be that they'd wish to volunteer to support with us. What we'd rather is see, sort of going back to the question around diversification, is that where I see a potential issue is that we operate as a CIC in its entirety, and that means that we open up our space to community groups such as like bushcraft organisations and the Scouts. And my concern is that if we limit our use, it means that other organisations can't use the space, which is, I just think, that's not my priority, but I think it is a shame that we can't offer the nature and the service and the resources that we have to other organisations that can benefit. But that's not our priority.
Okay, thank you. I think that wasn't really much to do with this planning permission in front of us, but we have had some answers there. Are there any more questions? Councillor Grandin.
Of what's... Sorry, thank you. Thank you, sorry. Yes, okay, thank you, sorry.
No? Okay. You have a question for our officer after what you've heard from... Yep, okay.
What's just been said. So we were thinking of a planning condition that would limit use, but the applicant has just said that while it's not their primary aim, it would limit them offering it to people like the Scouts and other similar organisations. Is there a way we can deal with that?
I think there is, if members wanted to embrace a little bit of more community access to facilities. So I think we would try and craft a condition that prevented a change of use away from the primary use as an alternative education centre. But we might be able to put something in that it allows limited community access for education purposes as a incidental use, and I look to the acting chief planning officer. But I think between us, in the period, if you agree the recommendation, we have to sort out some of the other bits and pieces. We could craft a condition that allowed some of that, but didn't give the applicant such latitude as then to have it as an all singing, all dancing attraction. And I don't mean to be pejorative, but I think we could come up, because it might be that the primary school, for example, want to come and do some pond dipping. Well, wouldn't it be wonderful if they could? So I think there's something around limited community access for education purposes, but I hear what you say, Councillor Grandin, and I think between us we could craft something that would be robust enough to allow that flexibility, but not wholesale abuse of the permission.
Thank you. I see by the nodding of your head, applicant, you're happy with a condition such as that. Thank you. Councillor Holt?
I was just going to say, really restrict it to no commercial use.
That does sound to be a valuable insight that perhaps the Chief Planning Officer can think about, but that would nail it in terms of, yes.
Thank you. I think my colleague, Councillor Holt's suggestion is really good. Could we not also restrict it to so many times per annum?
From the enforcement point of view, I guess that it makes it more difficult, because we then have to know how many people when they did it. I think with the spirit that seems to have been shown this morning, we all know what we're trying to achieve, and if we can get the words right, it wouldn't matter if it was as many times as possible, providing it was the community, the parish were happy that it was the primary school or the scouts or the guides or whatever it was. Yeah. There might be something that we just agree, perhaps through the parish liaison group, which groups in the community are considered valuable assets that could take advantage of the educational facilities. And that way we've worked together with all the community, and it ought to be a harmonious compromise.
Thank you. If not, thank you very much. And we will move on. I think we have one more speaker before we go into debate, and that's the ward member, Councillor Sally Davis. And you have 5 minutes to address the committee.
Thank you, Chair. This application came about after the applicant had started to operate their educational facilities on this site without permission. And this caused immense opposition in the surrounding community because a well-loved woodland through which there is a public footpath was suddenly fenced off. It was an unwelcome and unexpected upheaval. Woods are special. It's upsetting to see them changed, especially when they were previously open to the public. And that is where the mountain of opposition came through the use of it without permission. But we can't change the fact that these woods are now privately owned. And it was an unfortunate situation because it clouded the fact that these outdoor facilities are a force for good, providing services for Suffolk County Council. This woodland school would enable children who do not thrive in conventional school settings to learn and develop in nature. And that includes children from our primary and secondary schools in East Bergholt. So when a formal planning application was finally submitted after enforcement actions at the site, the applicant consulted with the community, and the primary concerns of residents emerged as traffic and the effect on the ecology and biodiversity of the site. The East End area of East Bergholt is quiet, but it's under increasing pressure from traffic as very large developments have been built in Lawford and Missley, and the route to the A12 from these settlements goes through East Bergholt and potentially around the back roads of East End, and the residents are right to be concerned. And I share those concerns, but I do believe they've been alleviated by the long list of planning conditions, especially the agreement not to use a minor road to reach the site, and that the number of traffic movements has now been clarified, the number of pupils reduced, which will not restrict the number of traffic movements. I would just ask that the number of parking spaces is the minimum thought necessary. In terms of biodiversity, I asked the applicant to provide a biodiversity net gain of 20%. Of course, there's a minimum of 10%, but I did ask for 20%, and I'm glad the planning officer has confirmed there will be a 10% biodiversity net gain, but I really believe that there can be more than that. I agree we must protect the great crested newts and the badgers, and the local residents are adamant about that too. As the planning officer has indicated, there are no policy reasons why this application should be refused, I don't think, and I think the planning conditions are sufficient to control the impact of this development. I particularly commend the design of the buildings on the site, which are refreshingly thoughtful and sustainable. And I do hope the residents of East End understand why I support this application, because I am going against the vocal opposition to this. This woodland can give children who struggle to fit in a place to be happy and secure and to learn in peace. And I hope if this application is granted, that in time the community around the school will be proud to pay host to this small woodland school. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are you willing to answer any questions or raise questions for you?
Yes, if there are any.
Any questions for the ward member? If not, thank you very much indeed. Right. I will now open the item for debate. Who'd like to kick it off? Councillor Wyman.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think the ward member really captured the whole spirit of how we feel, well, certainly how I feel about the whole situation. Clearly, there are always tensions in any situation, particularly where you've got woodland involved and wildlife, etc., and also quite a close population in a fairly way off place from the main part of the community. But the benefits far outweigh the tension, and certainly I'd be quite happy to propose that the grant be supported.
Thank you, Councillor Wyman. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Grandin.
So as a recommendation has been made, could I have clarification, because the recommendation is on the papers we have before us. We've mentioned various conditions, and we would want those conditions put into any, I suspect, any formal vote. So could you run through the additional conditions, and would the proposer accept them and the seconder accept them, please?
I think that's fallen to me. So I have been tapping away whilst we've been proceeding this morning. So what I've got is that we would be proposing to grant permission in accordance with the recommendation as amended by the table papers, which was the removal of item E, and then subject to further additional conditions or amendments prior to the decision being issued. And if I just pause there, the reason I say that is because when you look at the recommendation, we've given ourselves effectively a 10-week backstop to sort certain issues out. And I think it would be in the gift of the applicant potentially, and bearing in mind Councillor Beer's comments, and rightly so, that we want to limit the number of conditions we're just chucking on, it would be in their gift potentially to make amendments to the application so that we can approve those details and they can simply get away. So, for example, the conditions relating to the gates, ramped access and hard landscaping, they could actually amend the drawings now if they wanted to, and that would mean we could simply condition compliance with those rather than force them to make further applications down the line. So, having paused there, those additional conditions or amendments prior to decision would be a condition or amendment to the plans to show the gates being set further back, details of DDA compliant access or amendment to the plans to show the ramped access to the buildings, a condition or amendment to plans showing hard landscaping, including details of permeability, a condition or amendment to plans regarding permeability for badgers, amendment, however, of the routing plan condition that was proposed to incorporate further signage on the site in respect of access, parish liaison, a foul waste strategy, restriction of the use to educational purposes as specified in the application, and limited community educational uses. The devil in the detail will come when we draft that condition, but that's it in a headline term. Restoration condition when the use of the site ceases, and a removal of temporary permitted development rights. And I think that is it.
I would add a few more if I may.
Okay, so
Acting Chief Planning Officer.
In your hands.
Before you move on, can I just make sure that you haven't gone too far already for the proposer? You're happy with?
I'm content with the conditions, Chairman, on the proposal.
Sorry.
Okay. Yes.
I
Please
think
carry on with the rest.
I captured a few more. I think I captured them. Certainly the foul waste condition that Stephen mentioned, but I think we also could now say that the classrooms should have compostable toilets unless otherwise agreed. That deals with the issue of not having to dig up roots. There was the informative about the blue land not forming any part of this permission for, in terms of educational use. It was just those, just those 2 points. Oh, and defining the, I call them exclusion zones within the site around the badger set environment. And I think members may want to consider how to deal with Councillor Davis's 20% BNG, whether they want to actually condition that or not.
I think, I think not at this stage. It is an ambition rather than a condition. Thank you. Mr. Davis?
I'd just like to put forward a slight amendment to the transport plan condition you're proposing. The applicant did talk about defining the route in and out. Could we make certain that that's captured as a deliverable, and also for future monitoring of the success of this proposed route, the desired route, and also a mechanism for residents to let the applicant know if there are issues? Can't do that?
I think it'd be a little bit difficult to condition that your second request, but the first request, we'll just check whether...
Monitoring.
Yeah, I think within that sort of headline scope of the sort of the bullet that we put into the amended resolution, yeah, I think that can be incorporated. It's fairly typical on, for example, construction routing, that you would have a monitoring aspect, and then sometimes you can have a means to record any complaints and setting down how they were dealt with. I mean, yeah, we can try and...
Okay, thank you. And my other piece was around biodiversity net gain. The applicant did refer to the pond and indicated he would be willing to consider that in the future. I mean, we know ponds have a big bang for the buck in terms of biodiversity net gain. So, if possible, I would like to include a clear reference to the provision of that pond in the BNG plan.
I'm slightly more nervous about that one, simply because I think there's a requirement, and it's for the applicant to demonstrate and show how it will be met. I think we're probably being slightly unreasonable, not necessarily meeting the test for the condition, if we were to say you must do it in this fashion, you must use that pond.
Can we say?
But I think they can hear what you're saying.
Yeah, but can we say that we would look favourably on that? We would consider that a good
so I think
thing to deliver.
Might an informative be useful, so that it might say, in granting this permission, the committee had particular regard to the hope that they'll see ponds restored in the near future as part of the overall approach to BNG. So you flagged it, the applicants heard it, and through the parish liaison we'll be able to follow that through, hopefully.
Okay, I'll live with that.
Well, I think between you all you've picked it up, but I would just say that at another planning committee I sit on, they add a note to the applicant on those, pointing those out. But the liaison committee, which we've accepted, would be able to voice all those. So I don't think we need to add any more conditions. Thank you.
I think you're quite right. We can over-condition things, can't we? Are we all happy?
We are content, Chair.
We have a proposer and a seconder of a motion, which is including all of Mr. Stroud's notes.
Yes, would it be helpful to read?
It would be helpful to read it out at this stage.
And it may, just in case the appears to say I've missed off anything else, but I've tried to incorporate it in. So I've got grant permission in accordance with the recommendation amended by the table papers, and that was removal of item E, and subject to the further additional conditions or amendments to the application prior to the decision being issued. And that is the addition of a condition or amendment to plans to show gates being set further back, details of disabled access or amendment to the plans to show ramped access to the buildings, condition regarding hard landscaping and permeability or amendment to plans, condition regarding badger permeability and exclusion zones or amendment to plans, Amendment of the routing plan condition to incorporate signage on site, defining routes into the site, and future monitoring and recording of complaints. Parish liaison, foul waste strategy. I think there was an additional point on that. Including use of compostable toilets. Restriction of the use to educational purposes as specified in the application and limited community educational uses. Restoration condition if the use ceases. Removal of temporary usage permitted development rights. And then we've got informatives relating to the council's preference for the use of the external pond as part of the habitat to be provided for net gains. And then the blue lined land. That's it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Stroud. Okay, we all happy? You got it all clear?
Yep.
Oh, right. We'll start the electronic vote. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Chair. Members, that vote's been updated and is now in progress. Councillor Beer.
Approve the application.
Thank you. Councillor Grandin. Thank you. Thank you, members. Chair, that's 10 votes for. That's unanimous.
That's unanimous.